The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger was an American interceptor aircraft that was built as part of the backbone of the United States Air Force's air defenses in the late 1950s. Entering service in 1956, its main purpose was to intercept invading Soviet bomber fleets during the Cold War. Designed and manufactured by Convair, 1,000 F-102s were built. A member of the Century series, the F-102 was the first operational supersonic interceptor and delta-wing fighter of the USAF. It used an internal weapons bay to carry both guided missiles and rockets. As originally designed, it could not achieve Mach 1 supersonic flight until redesigned with area ruling. The F-102 replaced subsonic fighter types such as the Northrop F-89 Scorpion, and by the 1960s, it saw limited service in the Vietnam War in bomber escort and ground attack roles. It was supplemented by McDonnell F-101 Voodoos and, later, by McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom IIs. Many of the F-102s were transferred from the active duty Air Force to the Air National Guard by the mid to late 1960s, and with the exception of those examples converted to unmanned QF-102 full-scale aerial target drones, the type was totally retired from operational service in 1976. The follow-on replacement was the Mach 2 Convair F-106 Delta Dart, which was an extensive redesign of the F-102. Design and development, initial designs and problems. On October 8, 1948, the Board of Senior Officers of the U.S. Air Force made recommendations that the service organize a competition for a new interceptor scheduled to enter service in 1954. As such, the all-new design would initially be dubbed the 1954 Ultimate Interceptor. 4 months later, on February 4, 1949, the USAF approved the recommendation and prepared to hold the competition the following year. In November 1949, the Air Force decided that the new aircraft would be built around a fire control system. The FCS was to be designed before the airframe to ensure compatibility. The airframe and FCS together were called the weapons system. In January 1950, the USAF Air Materiel Command issued request for proposals to 50 companies for the FCS, of which 18 responded. By May, the list was revised downward to 10. Meanwhile, a board at the U.S. Department of Defense headed by Major General Gordon P. Saville reviewed the proposals, and distributed some to the George E. Valley-led Air Defense Engineering Committee. Following recommendations by the committee to the Saville Board, the proposals were further reduced to 2 competitors, Hughes Aircraft and North American Aviation. Although the Valley Committee thought it was best to award the contract to both companies, Hughes was chosen by Saville and his team on October 2, 1950. Proposals for the airframe were issued on June 18, 1950, and in January 1951 6 manufacturers responded. On July 2, 1954, 3 companies, Convair, Republic and Lockheed, won the right to build a mock-up. Until then, Convair had done research into delta-winged aircraft, experimenting with different designs, 2 of which fell under the name P-92. Of the 3, the best design was to win the production contract under the name Project MX-1554. In the end, Convair emerged as the victor with its design, designated XF-102, after Lockheed dropped out and Republic built only a mock-up. The development of 3 different designs was too expensive, and in November, only Convair was allowed to continue with its Model A280. To speed development, it was proposed to equip the prototypes and pre-production aircraft with the less powerful Westinghouse J-40 turbojet. Continued delays to the J-67 and MA-1 FCS led to the decision to place an interim aircraft with the J-40 and a simpler fire control system into production as the F-102A. The failure of the J-40 led to the Pratt & Whitney J-57, rated with 10,000 pounds force of thrust, being substituted for the prototypes and F-102As. This aircraft was intended to be temporary, pending the development of the F-102B, which would employ the more advanced Wright J-67, a licensed derivative of the Bristol Siddeley Olympus which was still in development. The F-102B would later evolve to become the F-106A, dubbed the Ultimate Interceptor. The prototype YF-102 made its first flight on October 24, 1953, but was lost in an accident 9 days later. The second aircraft flew on January 11, 1954, confirming a dismal performance. Transonic drag was much higher than expected, and the aircraft was limited to Mach 0.98, with a ceiling of 48,000 aft, far below the requirements. Major redesign. To solve the problem and save the F-102, Convair embarked on a major redesign, incorporating the recently discovered area rule, while at the same time simplifying production and maintenance. The redesign entailed lengthening the fuselage by 11 aft, being pinched at the midsection, with two large fairings on either side of the engine nozzle, with revised intakes and a new, narrower canopy. A more powerful model of the J-57 was fitted, and the aircraft structure was lightened. The first revised aircraft, designated YF-102A, flew on December 20, 1954, 118 days after the redesign started, exceeding Mach 1 the next day. The revised design demonstrated a speed of Mach 1.22 and a ceiling of 53,000 aft. These improvements were sufficient for the Air Force to allow production of the F-102, with a new production contract signed in March 1954. The production F-102A had the Hughes MG-3 fire control system, later upgraded in service to the MG-10. It had a 3-segment internal weapons bay under the fuselage for air-to-air missiles. Initial armament was 3 pairs of GAR-13 Quarters Falcon missiles, which included both infrared and semi-active radar homing variants. The doors of the 2 forward bays each had tubes for 12 FFARs, with initially 2 in being fitted and later 2.75 in replacing them. The F-102 was later upgraded to allow the carrying of up to 2 GAR-11/AIM-26 nuclear Falcon missiles in the center bay. The larger size of this weapon required redesigned center bay doors with no rocket tubes. Plans were considered to fit the MB-1 Genie nuclear rocket to the design, but although a Genie was test-fired from a YF-102A in May 1956, it was never adopted. The F-102 received several major modifications during its operational lifetime, with most airframes being retrofitted with infrared search tracking systems, radar warning receivers, transponders, backup artificial horizons, and improvements to the fire control system. A proposed close-support version would have incorporated, in addition, an internal Gatling gun, an extra 2 hardpoints for bombs, bigger internal fuel tanks, and an in-flight refueling probe. To train F-102A pilots, the TF-102A trainer was developed, with 111 eventually manufactured. The aircraft was designed with side-by-side seating to facilitate pilot training, a popular concept in the 1950s. This required a redesign of the cockpit and nose, incorporating a set of vortex generators on the top of the cockpit to prevent flow separation under certain circumstances, and repositioning of the intake ducts. Despite the many changes, the aircraft was combat-capable, although this variant was predictably slower, reaching only subsonic speeds in level flight. The numerous inherent design and technical limitations of the F-102 led to a proposed successor, initially known as the F-102B Ultimate Interceptor. The improved design, in which the proposed Curtiss-Wright J-67 jet engine was eventually replaced by a Pratt & Whitney J-75, underwent so many aerodynamic changes that it essentially became an entirely new aircraft and hence was redesignated and produced as the F-106 Delta Dart. Convair would also use a delta wing design in the Mach 2 class Convair B-58 Hustler bomber. Operational history, introduction to service. The first operational service of the F-102A was with the 327th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at George Air Force Base, in April 1956, and eventually a total of 889 F-102s were built, production ending in September 1958. TF-102s and F-102s were used in the 1960s by the Air Defense Command at Perrin AFB, Texas, to train new F-102 pilots. They also provided platform training on flight characteristics of delta-winged aircraft for pilots who were destined to fly the B-58 Hustler bomber for the Strategic Air Command. The F-102's official name, Delta Dagger, was never used in common parlance, with the aircraft being universally known as the Deuce. The TF-102 was known as the Tub, because of its wider fuselage with side-by-side twin seating. During the time the F-102A was in service, several new wing designs were used to experiment with the application of increased conical camber to the wings. Ultimately, a design was selected that actually increased elevator area, reduced takeoff speed, improved the supersonic LD ratio and increased the aircraft's ceiling to 56,000 ft. A modification was required to the landing gear doors due to the wing redesign. The Air Defense Command had F-102 Delta Daggers in service in 1960 and the type continued to serve in large numbers with both Air Force and Air National Guard units well into the 1970s. George W. Bush, later President of the United States, flew the F-102 in the 147th Fighter Interceptor Group based at Ellington AFB in Houston, Texas as part of his Texas Air National Guard service from 1968 to 1972. Vietnam service. The F-102 served in Vietnam, flying fighter patrols and serving as bomber escorts. A total of 14 aircraft were lost in Vietnam, 1 to air-to-air combat, several to ground fire and the remainder to accidents. Initially, F-102 detachments began to be sent to bases in Southeast Asia in 1962 after radar contacts detected by ground radars were thought to possibly be North Vietnamese Il-28 Beagle bombers considered to be a credible threat in that time period. The F-102s were sent to Thailand and other nearby countries to intercept these aircraft if they threatened South Vietnam. Later on, Boeing B-52 Stratofortress strikes, codenamed Arclight, were escorted by F-102s based in the theater. It was during one of these missions that an F-102 was shot down by a North Vietnamese Mach-1 MiG-21 using an AA-2 Atoll heat-seeking missile. The MiGs approached undetected, and one of the F-102s was hit by an air-to-air missile, which did not explode immediately, but remained lodged in the aft end of the aircraft, causing stability problems. As the pilot reported the problem to his wingman, the wingman observed the damaged Delta Dagger explode in mid-air, killing the pilot. This was the only air-to-air loss for the F-102 during the Vietnam War. The other F-102 pilot fired AIM-4 missiles at the departing MiG-21s, but no hit was recorded. The F-102 was employed in the air-to-ground role with limited success, although neither the aircraft nor the training for its pilots were designed for that role. The 509th Fighter Interceptor Squadron's deuces arrived at Da Nang Air Base, August 4, 1964 from Clark Air Base, Philippines. The Interceptor was equipped with 24 2.75 in FFARs in the fuselage bay doors. These could be used to good effect against various types of North Vietnamese targets in daylight. At night it proved less dangerous to use heat-seeking Falcon missiles in conjunction with the F-102's nose-mounted IRST on nighttime harassment raids along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Some F-102s were configured to accommodate a single AIM-26 Super Falcon in each side bay in lieu of the two conventional AIM-4 Falcons. Operations with both the F-102A and TF-102A two-seaters continued in Vietnam until 1968 when all F-102s were returned to the United States. Later use, in 1973, 6 aircraft were converted to target drones as QF-102s and later PQM-102Bs under a full-scale aerial target project known as Paved Use. Eventually, the program converted hundreds of F-102s for use as target drones for newer fighter aircraft, as well as testing of the U.S. Army's Patriot missile system. The F-102 and TF-102 were exported overseas to both Turkey and Greece. The Turkish F-102s saw combat missions during the 1974 Turkish invasion of Cyprus. There have been claims of air combat between Greek F-5s and Turkish F-102s above the Aegean Sea during the Turkish invasion. A Greek internet website editor, Demtriastogi, claims that the Greek F-5s had shot down 2 Turkish F-102s, while the Turkish site has claimed that their F-102s had shot down 2 Greek F-5s. However, both Greece and Turkey still officially deny any aircraft losses. The F-102 was finally retired from both of those air forces in 1979. The F-102 left U.S. service in 1976, while the last QF-102A/PQM-102B drone was expended in 1986. No F-102s remain in flyable condition today, although many can be seen at museums or as permanent static displays at Air Force and Air National Guard installations. Variants: YF-102, prototypes. Non-area ruled fuselage. Powered by 14,500 pound force J57P11, 2 built. YF-102A, area ruled prototypes. Powered by 16,000 pound force J57P23. 4 converted from pre-production aircraft. F-102A, production model. Initial 8 pre-production aircraft built with non-area ruled fuselage. Remainder built with area ruled fuselage. TF-102A, 2-seat training version, 111 built. F-102B, the original designation of the F-106A, F-102C, proposed tactical attack version with J57P47 engine. 2 converted as YF-102C engineering test beds. QF-102A, target drones converted from the F-102A. 6 built. PQM-102A, unpiloted target drones. 65 converted. PQM-102B, revised target drone conversion, capable of being flown remotely or by pilot and cockpit. 146 converted. Operators. Greece, Hellenic Air Force in 1969, Greece acquired 24 of these aircraft for use by the 114 Terex Tanagra. 19 of them were single-seat F-102As, 5 were two-seat TF-102As. They served with the Greek Air Force until 1978, when the F-102s were replaced by Mirage F-1CG fighters. Turkish Air Force, beginning in 1968. Approximately 50 F-102s and TF-102s were transferred to Turkey from USAF stocks. Before transfer to Turkey, they were overhauled by CASA in Seville. They were initially assigned to the 191st Philo based at Mertid, replacing the F-84F Thunderstreaks previously assigned to this unit. This unit was redesignated 142nd Philo in early 1973. In 1971, F-102s were also assigned to the 182nd Philo based at Diyarbakir ±R, replacing the F-84Fs previously being flown by this unit. F-102s remained in service with these two squadrons until mid-1979, when they were replaced by the F-104G in the 142nd Philo and by the F-100C in the 182nd Philo. United States Air Force, Air Defense Command/Aerospace Defense Command, 2nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Suffolk County AFB, 5th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Suffolk County AFB, 11th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Duluth AFB, 18th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Wordsmith AFB, 27th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Griffiths AFB, 31st Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Wordsmith AFB. Transferred to Alaska Air Command, 37th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Ethan Allen AFB, 47th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Niagara Falls AFB, 48th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Langley AFB, 57th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Naval Station Keflavik, 59th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Goose Bay AFB, 1960 Euro 1966, 61st Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Twax Field, 64th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Maxfield AFB, Payne Field, 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Selfridge AFB, 76th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Westover AFB. 82d Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Travis AFB, 86th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Youngstown AFB, 87th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Lockburn AFB, 95th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Andrews AFB, 317th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Maxfield AFB, 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Maxfield AFB, 323d Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Twax Field, Harmon AFB, 325th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Euro Twax Field, 326th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Richard Jebor AFB, 327th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro George AFB, Thule AB, 329th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro George AFB, 331st Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Webb AFB, 332nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Maguire AFB, England AFB, Thule AB, 438th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Kinshalo AFB, 456th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Castle AFB, 460th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Portland AFB, 482nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Seymour Johnson AFB, 498th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Geiger Field. Alaskan Air Command, 317th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Elmendorf AFB, 31st Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Elmendorf AFB. United States Air Forces in Europe, 32D Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro So Esterberg AB, 431st Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Zaragoza AB, 496th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Hahn AB, 497th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Torrejon AB, 525th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Bitburg AB, 526th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Ramstein AB. Pacific Air Forces, 4th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Mysore AB, 16th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Nhal AB, 40th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Yokota AB, 64th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Clark AB, 68th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Atazuk AB, 82D Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Nhal AB, 509th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, a Euro Clark AB. Air National Guard, 102D Fighter Interceptor Squadron, NYANG, a Euro Suffolk County ANGB, 111th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, TXANG, a Euro Ellington Field, 116th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, WAANG, a Euro Geiger Field, 118th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, CTANG, a Euro Bradley ANGB, 122nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron, LAANG, a Euro NAS New Orleans, 123D Fighter Interceptor Squadron, ORANG, a Euro Portland ANGB, 132nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron, MEANG, a Euro Bangor ANGB, 134th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, VTANG, a Euro Burlington ANGB, 146th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, PAANG, a Euro Pittsburgh AP, 151st Fighter Interceptor Squadron, TNANG, a Euro McKee Tyson ANGB, 152D Fighter Interceptor Squadron, AZANG, a Euro Tucson ANGB, 157th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, SCANG McEntire ANGB, 159th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, FLANG, a Euro Impson Field, Jacksonville ANGB, 1968, a Euro 1974, 175th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, SDANG, a Euro Sioux Falls AFB, 176th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, WIANG, a Euro Twax Field, 178th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, ANDANG, a Euro Hector Field, 179th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, MNANG, a Euro Duluth ANGB, 182nd Fighter Interceptor Squadron, TXANG, a Euro Kelly AFB, 186th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, Mount ANG, a Euro Great Falls ANGB, 190th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, IDANG, a Euro Gowan Field, 194th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, CAANG, a Euro Fresno ANGB, 196th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, CAANG, a Euro Ontario IAP. 199th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, HIANG, a Euro Hickam AFB. Aircraft on display. Canada, F-102A, 56-1266, a Euro Stephenville, Newfoundland. This aircraft was formerly of the U.S. 59th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, Goose Bay, Labrador. Greece, F-102A, 56-1106, a Euro Tanagra, 56-1232, a Euro Larisa. TF-102A, 56-2355 a Euro to Toy. Netherlands, F-102A, 56-1032 a Euro Royal Netherlands Military Aviation Museum, Soesterberg Air Base. Museum currently closed, reopening planned October 2014. Turkey, F-102A, 55-3386 a Euro Turkish Air Force Aviation Museum, Zilkoy, Istanbul. TF-102A, 56-2368 a Euro Turkish Air Force Aviation Museum, Zilkoy, Istanbul. United States, YF-102A, 53-1787 a Euro Air Park at Jackson Barracks Military Museum, New Orleans, Louisiana, 53-1788 a Euro Carolinas Aviation Museum, Charlotte, North Carolina. TF-102A, 54-1353 a Euro Century Circle at Edwards Air Force Base, near Rosamond, California, 54-1366 a Euro Pima Air and Space Museum adjacent to Davis-Monthan AFB in Tucson, Arizona, 56-2317 a Euro Grissom Air Museum, Grissom Air Reserve Base, Peru, Indiana, 56-2337 a Euro Fort Worth Aviation Museum, Fort Worth, Texas. 56-2346 a Euro Pennsylvania National Guard Military Museum, Pennsylvania National Guard Headquarters, Fort Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, 56-2352 a Euro Southern Museum of Flight, Birmingham, Alabama. F-102A, 54-1405 a Euro Strategic Air and Space Museum, Ashland, Nebraska near Offutt AFB, Nebraska, 55-3432 a Euro Hector Field, Fargo, North Dakota, 56-0984 a Euro Wings Over the Rockies Museum, Denver, Colorado. 56-0985 a Euro McIntyre Air National Guard Base, South Carolina, 56-0986 a Euro Maps Air Museum, Akron Canton Regional Airport, Ohio, 56-1053 a Euro Elmendorf AFB, Alaska Heritage Park, 56-1105 a Euro Lions Park in Great Falls, Montana, 56-1109 a Euro Peterson Air and Space Museum, Peterson AFB, Colorado Springs, Colorado. 56-1114 a Euro March Field Air Museum, March ARB, Riverside, California, 56-1140 a Euro Aerospace Museum of California, former McClellan AFB, Sacramento, California, 56-1151 a Euro Museum of Aviation, Robbins AFB, Warner Robins, Georgia, 56-1219 a Euro Empire State Aerosciences Museum, Schenectady County Airport, New York, 56-1252, Ellington Field Reserve Base, Houston, Texas. Former President of the United States George W. Bush flew this model with the 147th Fighter Interceptor Group, 111th Fighter Interceptor Squadron of the Texas Air National Guard in the early 1970s. It is mounted on a pole that exits the burner. His name is on the canopy. 56-1268 a Euro San Diego Air and Space Museum, Gillespie Field, El Cajon, California, 56-1357 a Euro 125th Fighter Wing Memorial Air Park, Jacksonville Air National Guard Base, Jacksonville International Airport, Florida, 56-1368 a Euro Evergreen Aviation Museum, McMinnville, Oregon. 56-1393 a Euro Pima Air and Space Museum adjacent to Davis-Monthan AFB in Tucson, Arizona, 56-1413 a Euro Castle Air Museum, Atwater, California, 56-1415 a Euro Pittsburgh IAP Air Reserve Station. Refurbished in 2010, 56-1416 a Euro National Museum of the United States Air Force, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio, 56-1325 a Euro Minnesota Air National Guard Base, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 56-1515 a Euro Maxfield Air Museum, Maxfield Air Force Base, Washington, 57-0833 a Euro Hill Aerospace Museum, Hill AFB, Utah, 57-0858 a Euro Tyndall Air Park, Tyndall AFB, Florida, 57-0788, Long Island MacArthur Airport, Long Island. Specifications. Data from the Great Book of Fighters, General Characteristics, Crew, 1, Length, 68 feet 4 inches, Wingspan, 38 feet 1 in, Height, 21 feet 2 in, Wing Area, 661.5 FTA squared / 61.52 miles squared or 695 FTA squared / 64.57 miles squared, Airfoil, NACA 0004-65 mod root and tip, empty weight, 19,350 pounds, loaded weight, 24,500 pounds, max takeoff weight, 31,500 pounds. Power plant, 1 Pratt & Whitney J57P25 afterburning turbojet, dry thrust, 11,700 pound forces, thrust with afterburner, 17,200 pound forces. Internal fuel capacity, 1,085 US gal, external fuel capacity, 215 US gal drop tanks, performance, maximum speed, Mach 1.25 at 40,000 feet, range, 1,350 miles, service ceiling, 53,400 feet, rate of climb, 13,000 feet per minute, wing loading, 35 pounds FTA squared, thrust weight, 0.70, armament, rockets, 24 2.75 in FFA are unguided rockets in missile bay doors, missiles, 6 AIM-4 Falcon air-to-air missiles or 3 AIM-4 Falcon. 1 AIM-26 Falcon with conventional or nuclear warhead. Avionics, MG-10 Fire Control System, see also. Century Series, related development, Convair F-92, Convair F-106 Delta Dart, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Avro Canada CF-105 Arrow, Dassault Mirage 3, English Electric Lightning, Mikoyan Gurovic MiG-21/Xiong J-7, Saab 35 Draken, Sukhoi Su-9 Su-11, Sukhoi Su-15, related lists, list of fighter aircraft, list of military aircraft of the United States, references, notes. Citations. Bibliography. External links, Aerospace profile of the F-102, Global Aircraft's F-102 specs, achievements, and photos, Joe Bora's F-102 Delta Dagger history, AeroWeb, list of F-102 Delta Dagger on display in the U.S.